everybody, and welcome to the opening symposium for Into the New 2017. This is the first time our symposium has been live streamed, so thank you for everyone who's sitting in front of the device watching us here tonight. I'm going to wave, and imagine you're waving back. My name is Gudrun, and Gudrun Soling, Sigurðardóttir, actually. And I am your MC for this festival. I am a recent graduate and currently a performance maker and a director. I appreciate that a symposium is a serious and an academic affair, so I have dressed up for the occasion. And now, before we begin, I will take my dog, Puddle, for a walk. Now, this might first seem meaningless or perhaps a bit strange, but as the night will go on, you will soon become to realize its deeper meaning. Come on. Good boy. Before we go any further, there are a few people who need to be thanked. The Pearce Institute for having us and their lovely staff, production staff and students who have made the space look so wonderful and supported the students in the making of their work. The CPP staff team, who you are going to meet in a moment. And thank you to the students sharing their work with us throughout this week. And a warm welcome to our guests who will be speaking and contributing to our symposium this evening. I will introduce them in detail later on. And I will now hand over to the CPP staff team. Can we give them a round of applause?
Hello everybody, can you hear me? We'd like to begin with this quote from John Muir. I only went out for a walk and finally concluded to stay out till sundown. For going out, I found, was really going in. Into the New is our festival of graduating work made by Level 4 students of the Contemporary Performance Practice Programme at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. This year's festival, and in particular tonight's symposium, is framed by these well-known words from Scottish-American naturalist John Muir. In offering this tonight, we would like to invite you to imagine that Into the New is a walk in its own right. A walk that all of us in this room, the student artists who have made the work, the lecturers who have mentored and supported them, and you, our audience, will be walking together.
We want to invite you to imagine as well that this festival is not the destination of any particular walk, albeit a significant moment in the process of making one's degree show, but that it is more a way marker in a larger metaphorical walk, and that the residue of the art we may all encounter as we pass through the festival may live on and continue to be with us as we walk beyond it, in our memory and in our bodies.
With ecological focus, and while bearing the radical pedagogy of CPP in mind, we hope that the performances by these graduating students allows for the embedding of the work in our lives beyond these spaces.
So to begin the symposium this evening, As we sit and hear from local artists, activists, academics, and authors, we'd like to consolidate this idea of Into the New being a way marker further. The CPP staff and Level 4 students, Sunava, Marie, Maria, Frank, Kieran, Tammy, Rachel Jane, Chris, and Tulani would like to begin this symposium with the following words and actions.
I walk with others from the egocentric self to the ecocentric self, carrying my intuition, my imagination, and my dreams. Whilst walking, I encourage learning through the soul, focusing on where the emotional and the intellectual worlds meet, where inner and outer converge, where the foot meets the soil.
I went to the forest and I walked backwards, and with every step I take, more and more close to the beach.
I know I am meant to walk, but I don't know how or with whom. I don't know if my pace will be too fast, if my enthusiasm will be too much, if I will become too obsessed with the details I see around me, or fixated on where it is we are meant to be going. It's not until I accept that we are all going in different directions, observing different views, that just being side by side is understood as enough. I feel proud to have walked with you all.
Journeying between the natural and the artificial, the day and the night, I prepare to walk onto the dance floor.
Led by the depth of creative care and integrity in the students' working process, my new journey has involved moving alongside those of us who are still implicitly excluded from the worlds of art and performance through issues of race and class, and has drawn me into a history of creative protest, which the work has shown me is needed now as much as ever.
This journey is like going for a walk in the rain, but I have jeans on and they're sticking to my legs. Just when I think I can't get any greater, splash! A lorry drives through a puddle and leaves me drenched. And although I'm in a region, I also secretly love it.
A walk that starts with small steps at first. We meet at the start of your journey. I've been on the path a little longer, but we're heading in the same direction. At times our feet are in step, sometimes we walk with different gaits, but we walk together and we talk. We share a journey, conversation, moments of learning, and we walk now all together, striding forward, eyes looking towards the horizon.
I went for a walk, and as I walked, I learned to stop anticipating and just take each moment as it comes.
My walk is a quiet one, contemplative and vulnerable. It is a walk of making tentative connections with others, a walk of fear, of unknown landscape and a derelict building, brimming with new life. This is a journey of love, taking your time and remembering to breathe together slowly.
This has been a enchant.
Like walking in a tunnel, fingertips outstretched, feeling the edges, like glimmers. Carving desire paths into sinews and synapses and hoping for something.
A walk, a talk, and an observation. A direction. A very clear direction. Understanding what's going to happen and what's ahead of us all. All I have seen is courage. A view from the edge. A smile as I walk and talk with you all this week.
I went for a walk in silence. On my walk in silence, I attempt to challenge those long-standing lines. Redraft and erase those hard lines. Point to paper, mind to heart, and thought to action.
A cairn is a human-made pile or stack of stones. The word cairn comes from the Scottish Gaelic cairn. Cairns have been and are used for a broad variety of purposes, from prehistoric times to the present.
Cairns are used as trail markers in many parts of the world. In uplands, on moorland, on mountaintops, near waterways and on sea cliffs, as well as in barren deserts and tundra. They vary in size from small stone markers to entire artificial hills, and in complexity from loose conical rock piles to delicately balanced structures and elaborate feats of megalithic engineering.
If you look on your tables this evening, you will find that there are some stones. We would like to invite you to take a stone and hold it in your hands for the time you spend with us at Into the New. When you feel ready, you are invited to commit your stone to the cairn we have just created. Perhaps this action for you is a physicalizing or a commitment in which you reaffirm your being here physically with us, reminding yourself that we are all in this together and that your presence matters as we walk through, amongst, and within what has been created.
Thank you for walking with us through Into the New 2017. I would like to introduce our first speaker tonight, Alistair McIntosh. Alistair is a resident of Govan and a founding trustee of the Galgael Trust, who grew up on the Isle of Lewis. In 2009, Alistair made a 12-day pilgrimage on foot through the Isle of Lewis and Harris, reflecting on what it means to go into nature in the innermost way. This is the subject of his major new book, Poacher's Pilgrimage, An Island Journey, from which he will share reflections on John Muir and what he explores as the ecology of the imagination. Let's give Alistair a round of applause.
It was a night of wild and fretful sleep. The tent walls billowed out as if to burst, and then snapped back to give a ghostly pummeling. I pulled my rucksack close in beside me as a bedmate, sheltering behind the bulk to fend off the worst of the battering, dozing and then being shaken back awake again until at last exhaustion claimed the night and seemed to quell the tempest's force. It was the dawn light that awoke me the next day, day 5, Friday. People who study wilderness experience say that civilization is only 4 days deep. The trappings fall away and we open to a world more primal. I draw back the zipper and peer east. It looks Baltic out there. The skies are hot and grey. Is it earlier than I'm thinking, and this just the glimmerings of dawn? I fire up the phone. The clock shows 7. Thankfully, there's no signal, and so no beep-beep of messages. John Muir said that we don't go out to nature, we go in. But on a day like this, I'd rather just be staying in. Deep ecology sounds fun until you're in the thick. And so, folks, that was part of a 12-day walk in 2009. It took me 7 years to write the book because of the depth that I found myself being drawn into. The night before, I'd struggled down a glen, exhausted after 14 hours of walking, the storm coming on, the cold setting in, mindful of the need to guard against hypothermia, finding it impossible to find a place in which to pitch my tent, until in front of me, 2 figures rose up and pounded off into the darkness. 2 of the crochet, the cattle of the fairies, the red deer. And I knew that where the deer had camped the night, I would find no better spot to pitch my tent. I had walked into the thick, not just in terms of weather conditions, but also of the inner life. 2 weeks previously, I had been in the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva. As we sat there dining, a table of what I felt in my mind were piteously rich Arabic brothers sat at their table, and one of them, bored out of his mind, sat there striking matches from a box and dropping each match down onto the mahogany table, leaving a growing pile of smoldering matches. We were still in the midst of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It felt like a metaphor for what I was speaking at the following day on NATO's Partnership for Peace program to senior military and diplomats, looking at the issue, how do we move beyond war? My remit to speak about the power of non-violence. And on that day, before I rested the night in the storm just described there, on the estate of North Harris, which is owned by the local community in partnership with the John Muir Trust. And David Cameron, then the chair of the North Harris Trust, asked me when writing that passage specifically to point out in an endnote that in becoming a partner with the community on Harris, the John Muir Trust had set no conditions. It trusted the community to look after the wilderness of its place in a fitting way. And the fact that David should have asked me to insert that passage in speaks in itself to the living testimony of John Muir here in Scotland. And the day before that night, I'd walked down the river that flowed out of Loch Foshimid. That was where, in 1912, J.M. Barry, the son of Free Church parents from Kirriemuir near Dundee, had gone on a fishing holiday. And there a little island had inspired him to write his play, Mary Rose. Alfred Hitchcock said it was the only play. His only regret was that he had never been allowed by Universal Pictures to turn it into a film. Because, they said, the executives said, it was too Twilight Zone. It was too on the edge for modern audiences. I'm looking for a filmmaker who will make that film now, set in modern context. Because it's also been said that this is one of the most deepest pieces of literature ever written about the human unconscious. When we go out into nature, we are really going in to nature to the point where we meet our own unconscious. Mary Rose was a little English girl whose parents had also gone on a fishing holiday to Loch Foshimid in Barry's play released in 1920, his longest running play at the time in the Haymarket. And while her parents, in their upright uptightness, in their psychological disposition that had given rise to the First World War that Barry was so concerned about, with his prophecy that there would soon be another war because the deep roots of war had not been dealt with, while they were fishing, Mary Rose, metaphorically the child traumatized by war, was taken away by the fairies. And here Barry was drawing, as we can tell from his field book notes, from stories like the Ballad of Bonnie Kilmeny that James Hogg wrote down, as well as local Hebridean legends about how the fairies would take unhappy children away to find, perhaps, a better world. What is the function that the fairies are playing here? The function, as John McInnes of the School of Scottish Studies at Edinburgh University puts it, is that in Scottish folklore and literature, the fairies, the Shia, are a metaphor for the imagination. What war trauma does to children and to other living things. As Yolanda Gampel, the Israeli psychotherapist who gave her life to working with the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, emphasizes, what war does is it cuts off the articulation between the inner life and the outer life. So you either withdraw into being the type of bleeding heart and artist who is unable to cope with outer life and often goes to ways of drugs or suicide in the end. You withdraw in the sense of mental health problems such as Mary Rose metaphorically represents in being taken away by the fairies. Or alternatively, you go all into the outer life. You become a Rupert Murdoch or a Donald Trump, whose mother was from the Isle of Lewis, whose mother's grandparents' people on all four sides had been forcibly cleared from the lands in the south and west of Lewis, uprooted from their place, and Donald Trump now the product of that. In which case, it's all on the outside. Everything is on the outside because the inner life is disconnected. As I walked along the base of the Cleasham, also in the North Harris estate. I reflected on the legend from that part, from the slope of the fallen stones. If you've been up the Cleasham, you'll see boulders the size of lorry cabs ripped off in the Ice Age. And it was on the slope of the fallen stones that many years ago, two men were coming back from Stornoway, each with a barrel of whiskey over his shoulder. And as he reached the slope, they saw that the door was open in the hill. The door of the Sheehan, the house of the fairies, was open, and the music was coming out, and the discotheque lights were on, and wow! The first guy just charged straight in and joined the Shia in the dancing. But the second guy, he knew the deep stories. And he took the pin from his plaid, the iron pin that constrains the power of the other world. And he jammed it into the hinge of the door, and he too joined the dance. They danced all night. When dawn came, the first man said, "Just one more reel, just one more reel," and would not stop. The second man knew he had to leave, went out, withdrew his pin, and returned to everyday life. The first man was not seen for the rest of the year. 1 year later, the second man was coming back over the same place again. Again, the door was open, the discotheque lights were on, the fantastic music was coming out of the hill, the source of creativity in the tradition. If you sleep on a Sheehan, you will either be given the gift of poetry or you will go mad, probably much the same thing. And so he goes in once again, taking care to put his pin in the hinge, and there is his friend, still dancing, still with a heavy barrel of whiskey over his shoulder. Just one more reel, just one more reel. But he's all wasted and emaciated. Because at the end of the day, we are not fairies. We are human beings. At the end of the day, we must remain connected with one foot in the inner life and the other foot articulated, joined up to the outer life. That is how we heal the trauma of our times. Nature very often is the greatest healer of that trauma. Because when you go into nature in the way that I described in that opening passage, you have to be very grounded in the physical. You have to be incarnate, in carnal form in this world. But it is spirit that is incarnate, as John Muir so well knew. I put it to you, friends, that the lesson of John Muir for our times is that we must take care of these precious holy places, whether it is a sacred site next door to us in Govan Old, do visit the stones there, here in Govan, or the sacred Isles of the Hebrides, or wherever might be precious to you. We must care for these places. We must enter into a right relationship with them. We must use them to rebuild our articulation of the inner and outer life. And friends, many of you here are artists of various types. We must use how these places speak to us to make great prophetic art. art that names the powers that be, that unmasks the powers that be, revealing how they cause oppression, disarticulation in our times, and then engages the powers that be, wrestles non-violently with power to call it back to nothing less than its higher, God-given vocation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Sarah Hopfinger. Sarah is an alumni of the CPP programme, a Glasgow-based artist who works as a director, performer and researcher in contemporary performance. Her practice sits between theatre, choreography and live art. She works with diverse collaborators, including children and adults, and professional and non-professional performers. Inclusivity and collaboration are at the heart of her approach. In her practice-led PhD, she explored and developed an ecological performance practice, focusing on how performance can enact and embody the ecological through its very methods and modes of creative practice. This evening, Sarah is going to talk about her most recent intergenerational project, Wildlife. Let's welcome Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can we have... Okay, hi everyone. So the title of this short little talk is Things Sarah has been thinking about wildness and performance recently, and how she's not sure if talking about some of these things will be a good idea, because her mind changes a lot about what she thinks wildness is, and so getting a hold of it or grasping wildness, trying to pin it down, often feels redundant and futile, and sometimes causes her to rip up the paper she has been writing words about wildness on. But then again, it can help to try to attempt to name and put words to stuff, to say something about something that's difficult or impossible to hold on to. So maybe words don't have to pin things down. Maybe there's potential in words for working with what's ungraspable. And when it comes to performance, Sarah feels that there's something unique about creating and doing live performance that makes it a potentially great medium through which the complexity of wildness can be explored. And this is because, for her anyway at the moment, the most exciting thing about live performance is that it can enact wildness through its modes, forms, and processes. Maybe it can do wildness as opposed to simply be about or represent wildness. And this she definitely finds exciting, as she has already said in this title, but also she does not want to put performance on a pedestal and idealize it by making grand claims about what it can do and what she can do with it, because an important part of performance's potential to enact wildness is, Sarah thinks, to lessen our human control, grip, predictions, intentions, or rather to kind of lessen our grip on thinking we have full control and that we can fully predict or intend our performance practices and live performances. And this is particularly relevant when it comes to wildness and directing. How do you direct wildness? Well, she doesn't think you can really directly direct it, but that there is potential in the paradoxes here. There is potential in managing in order to unmanage, offering containers in order to work with what's uncontainable, unpredictable, unforeseeable, unrehearsable, and unknown. Because maybe wildness isn't really a thing or a goal to get to, a thing to be or not be, or even a place to go to outdoors, but it's more a kind of state of being and doing, wilding maybe, as opposed to wildness or the wild. This brings us to another exciting potential of live performance, which Sarah thinks is also pretty important, and that's that by doing wildness, by performance being a kind of wilding process, this might implicitly challenge the idea that wildness is only something outdoors, out in the wilds, outside of the rehearsal studio or the theatre studio. It's not that she thinks wildness is not outdoors, but it's that to pin wildness down as something only outside and in certain types of places is, she thinks, to risk making wildness an orthodoxy, wildness as something out there beyond the theatre or performance venue and studio. So maybe working with wildness indoors in the studio can be a kind of radical act, a way of demonstrating that wherever we are, we're always already performing in and participating within the wildness of this earth that we live on. There are a lot of ideas going on here, I know. So in concluding the title of this presentation, Sarah proposes to focus on directing and wildness. It's the title. So this is a picture of me and my cat Molly. This is a picture of me and my cat Molly. I'll do it in the microphone. At the moment, I've got quite a bad back, and I'm having to do a lot of work on my computer, so I tend to lie down on my front to do my work quite a lot of the time. And sometimes my cat, Molly, will climb on my back and sit there, but I can't see her, but I do know that she's there. So a few years ago, I went on a walk, and I saw a rainbow. And I stopped so I could look at the rainbow, and I kind of stood there and put my bag down and looked at the whole view of the rainbow that I could see. And the rainbow kind of disappeared when I did this, when I tried to look at it in kind of full view. But then when I focused on the things that were around and about, like there were trees and rocks and cars and a road, when I kind of softened my gaze, the rainbow seemed to appear more boldly again to me. So it felt like when I indirectly or partially looked, then I could get more of a sense of this rainbow. So these are some of the people that I worked with when I first made Wildlife. And when I made it recently, Irene, who's over there, was also in it. These people here are, this is Geraldine and Cara, Graham, Gabby, and Archie, Pete, Lennon, and Liz. So in one of the rehearsals during the making of Wildlife, I stood against the wall looking in on all the performers moving, and they're moving to different instructions. And from this outside position, I find it really difficult to know what prompts to give to the performers. I'm unable to sense the possibilities of their movements. I think I'm trying to see this activity in full view. I begin moving in and out of the performance space, and suddenly I'm turning and traveling in amongst the performers and their movements, and I'm seeing what's around and about me as I go. I suddenly see Gabby's flinging arm coming towards me, so I have to dip underneath it, and I find myself alongside with Archie and Graham, and they do something that seems to echo something that Cara's doing the other side of the room. So I suggest to Archie and Graham that they interpret Cara's movements. And then I have to jump to avoid Lenin bashing into me, and I come across Geraldine and Pete, and they're exploring their own individual instructions. But there seems to be potential for them moving together in some way. So I asked Geraldine to start interpreting Pete's movements, and this instruction seems to kind of encourage them to do something that they were already sensing the possibility of. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I see Archie, who's poised on his tiptoes as if he's about to run. So I suggest to him to run in and out of the moving bodies. And then Cara and Liz, when Archie passes them, almost seems to start running with them. And so I suggest that they can run with Archie too, So when, in the first part of this session, I was standing outside of this movement activity, I think I was trying to fully lead the practice by my directives. But when I began weaving within the activity, I kind of stopped trying to fully determine it and to fully see the performers like in full view. And I think my directing became more a matter of participating in, rather than being a leader or separated onlooker of, this performance ecology. I was on the go, experiencing and contributing to this performance activity by moving within it. And it seemed like letting the practice happen took precedence over making it happen. And by letting go of fully controlling the practice, I started to get to know what I was capable of doing within it. I also think that I wasn't just responding to people as individuals when I was weaving in and out of it, and it felt like I was responding more to the betweens of the different performers. So collaborating wasn't simply about collaborating with a group of individual people, but about collaborating with the unpredictability of their movements and collaborating with the unpredictability of the different relations that emerged between them. Chase into yourself when you want to. And listen up. So I'm going to propose that directing wildness in performance is less a question of trying to see the work directly and fully, or of trying to make the work communicate, represent, or be about wildness. And it's more a question of joining in with the wilding of the performance practices in the moment of those practices being done. And maybe this can allow for a performance to emerge that's doing something wild. just want to say good luck to all of the level 4 students with your work this week. I'm sure it'll be great.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I would now like to invite you to have a short 10-minute discussion with the people at your table about the ideas that you've heard so far tonight. We have offered you a starter question on your programme. However, we do recognise that the concept of wild is a contested idea. So the question is, what happens when we shift our perspective from visiting the wild to being wild? Okay, everyone. If we can just pause our conversations, you will have an opportunity to continue them later on tonight. But I am going to introduce our next speaker, who is John Borsnell. He makes work with texts, sounds, and objects. He has performed at Buzzcut Festival Glasgow, Spill Festival Ipswich, and at the South London Gallery. He was writer in residence for Live Art Club at Norwich Arts Centre and a Spill writer in 2014. He completed his PhD, The Unsound Object and Intimate Space, in 2015. Let's welcome John.
Might have gone out of order slightly. I'm an imposter. Or at the very least, I've not read enough about imposters. I've not read any John Muir directly, instead encountering him in the pages of a book on Humboldt I borrowed from Holly. I've not even really read any Thoreau, instead encountering him whilst performing pages from John Cage's songbooks. I've not read enough about ecology, bar the performance ecologies of gesture emerging from tabletop musicians and performers. And considering the context, I've actually not read enough about wilderness or shifting baseline syndrome. But Hannah says, it's what happened to the Enlightenment, isn't it? A century of intellectual rigor turned in on itself, a mind in chaos suspected of genius. In a setting of cheap thrills and false emotion, the grass went from the doorstep to the horizon, and the best box hedge in Derbyshire was dug up for the ha-ha so that the fools could pretend they were living in God's countryside. These then are some assumptions: that I do have a practice, that this practice is rooted in liveness, that this practice has two components, the work and the studio. Working on these assumptions, a question: what point does the work become the work? At what point does the work, what we encounter in, for want of a better phrase, moments of liveness, become itself? At what point, passing out of the studio walls, does it obtain the characteristics of the work? And of what does this characteristic consist? And why does it not have this characteristic when it is in the studio? And all of this is nonsense, of course. The painter Philip Guston once said, when you start working, everybody is in your studio. The past, your friends, enemies, the art world, and above all, your own ideas. All are there. Just ignore this, it's fine. But as you continue painting, they start leaving one by one, and you're left completely alone. Then, if you're lucky, even you leave. 10 miles north, 2017. Are you lost? No, I'm just writing. This has just opened up. This is a new forest planted. It was going to be houses, but now it's a forestry commission thing. You must be pleased. Oh yes, much better than houses. All right, let's play with the ball. Let's tire them out a little bit. A little stream hidden by the fence from the main road, 3 lovely hairy dogs, an aeroplane hidden in the clouds, hilltops just grazed by them, and the land reclaimed from grazing too. White cylinders of new trees, I'm writing, distant echoing barks, I'm not tired yet. But my leg is cramping a bit. Jet plane now and 2 cars, crows and pigeons and pinprick car light, footsteps, no, bicycle tracks, tiny birds, molehills, reddish water, flattened reeds, damp fresh smell, and I'm not cold yet. Now my ears are straining to drop away from town, but town was quiet anyway, bar the street cleaning machine, leaving a trail of mud down Main Street. Wind now announcing what? Noise and recording, car slowing, passing, ears getting cold, and how does this affect listening? Lines of sheep 3 fields away, distant voices, greying horizons, crow right to left, ears underneath traffic, end. 10 miles north, 2014. 1. Errors in my map reading. First measuring distance north with a piece of string, a piece of red wool on an OS map, accidentally coming 11 rather than 10 miles north, and secondly, not working out how far the location was from the bus stop, plus sticking to roads rather than bridleways, again foolish in hindsight, means the light is fading as I arrive at the corner of the road and an old track. 2. Clouds of midges, white Morris 1000, jet fighter, partridge, swans and ducks, rabbit breaking for cover, helicopter quartering the countryside, flapping pigeons, raggedy crows and goats. 4. Dust mixed with sugar beets, silage, 3 different bonfires, new fences and unexpected honeysuckle. 8. I'm sidling up to the problem, as usual, by not thinking about it. I'm concentrating on the map not blowing away, rather than I'm imagining the shape of the jet fighter instead of I'm smelling a pile of sugar beet, a story high, not I'm not. In 2014, with the artist Holly Rumble, I walked from the source of the River Kelvin in Banton to where it meets the Clyde, here in Govan. Over 3 days, at every bridge along the Kelvin, Holly collected water samples and made sound recordings. At every bridge, bless you, I write texts, words, verse, what have you. A day later, at Buzzcut in the Pearce Institute, not in this room, that walk was presented. There are photographs, there is a video. But all the actions that led to that presentation were on the walk, and the walk is what I think of as the work. As an aside point, at this point, I should probably point out that Banton to Govan was 80 to 90% Holly's work. I am an imposter. The water samples have a second life as part of Amy Sharrock's Museum of Water exhibition. The written text has a second life where I try to claim it as work. 45. We are too high to collect water, too wide to record in a sheltered spot. Eating an eel, a Van Vanet drill, a site office, an overflowing bin, a no parking zone, washing our beaks, a crow on a lamppost, a potential development site. We are improving the image of construction. We could be home by now. In the performance Banton to Govan 2014, I'm wearing this hat. Though I don't wear it for the duration of the walk. 4. We lose the river under a field, disappearing into a larger pipe with a grill on front. There's a small amount of scum on the surface, the sort that just accumulates on slow field edge water. There is a pair of shoes on the side. A corrugated plastic pipe drips red water into a stream. Jet plane, biplane. 46, 47, 48. 3 bridges, rail, road, road. This air is thunderous. Thunderous slip roads merging, looping lanes. We're not train spotters, are we? I say, as I photograph the engineer's plaque on the rail bridge. Walk through under all these 3 bridges and out into a carefully landscaped museum approach footpaths. Super futuristic buildings on the eastern horizon, and opening out, certainly, a fox trots on the western bank. In 2014, I measured 10 miles north of the house in Norwich where I was living at the time using a piece of red wool on a map. I caught a bus to Aylsham and walked out into the countryside. This was the first step in following an invitation from writer and musician Patrick Farmer to approach and consider a simple question. How do you write about listening without writing about listening? Patrick's idea was for participants to follow, appreciate, approach, realize a simple text score. Listening and it's not. Pinpoint whatever exists, town, village, mountain, forest, shopping center, office building, river, ocean, etc. Exactly 10 miles north of your home. Visit as many times as you should like, making a note of the location. Whilst there, try to write about listening in a way that does not point directly to or at it. And so I walked out into the countryside. 5, monotony. So by the time I'm actually finally at the spot or near enough, I feel I have at least 2 hours worth of absorbed time. Sounds, yes, but also smells, sights, sore feet, distance. After map reading mistakes, leaping out onto verges to avoid cars, a phone call from my wife, where are you exactly? I'm ready to pack it in. So the new version of 10 Miles North text, made last week in 2017, does not follow Patrick's instructions as it writes about listening fairly directly. So it exists as a kind of pairing rather than claiming some kind of equivalency with the original. But it is becoming part of the process of fieldwork, perhaps enactment rather than aboutness. And if you just ignore this,
Thank you, John. I keep doing this when they've told me I can do this. Okay. Rosemary Lee is known for working in a variety of contexts and media. Rosemary has created large-scale site-specific works with cross-generational casts, solos for herself and other performers, as well as video installations and short films. Her work is characterized by an interest in creating a moving portraiture of both individuals and of the close performing communities she brings together. Regardless of the scale of these projects, she creates a unique intimacy with her audience, whilst also exploring and highlighting our relationship with our environment. Rosemary is unable to be with us this evening, but has written the following work, Morning Thoughts as the Frost Melts, especially for this event. I would like to invite Laura Bissell to share Rosemary's words with us.
Thank you. I hope I can do Rosemary's words justice. Morning light as the frost melts. When I first got Lucy's beautiful email telling me about your symposium, it caught my imagination immediately. She stirred a desire to contribute, and with that, the feeling of a little excitement. It was similar to the feeling I have on a walk. Somewhere back in my mind, I sensed a twig snapping, water below the reeds, light, daylight. Imagining, remembering nature, is it sometimes enough for me? The sensorial remembrance of being outdoors, of the flora and fauna, seems to feed me very well, though the guilt of not going out often enough counters that. Do I want to work it there in my memory rather than be there in the flesh? I'm writing this at 8 a.m. on the 5th of January. I'm surrounded by my accounts on a large dining room table. I can see out to the long garden I've walked down every year since I was born in this house in 1959. I'm staying here to be my mother's companion in the last year of her life. The frost is lifting. The traffic outside the front is louder. My mother is sleeping, and I can just glimpse the orchard beyond the shrubbery, leading to the railway line at the end of the garden. Apple and pear trees, climbed by us and our neighbours, are long gone, but a new oak tree has found its way here and now dwarves the walnut and shades the old tangled raspberry canes, which this year were infested with the weirdest jumping bugs. Here is my childhood, here in this garden. Now the trees and shrubs twist, contort, and die. There are no more roses. The little tiger lilies I waited for each year are gone. The sadness this brings up to me has to be pushed gently back, like brambles growing over a path as you walk by. Is that why I haven't been down the garden since I arrived? Just a few minutes away in the car are the marshes with their ruined pump houses, reed beds and hidden warblers, and in the other direction, the east coast, being eaten away at the heart of the town and growing fast at the south end. Once you had to jump 6 foot to get down to the sand. I remember the pang of fear as I mustered courage to jump it. I was a timid girl, I feel ashamed to admit. Now they have to bring tractors each day to keep the sand and shingle from engulfing the esplanade, spreading it like icing on a cake across the South Beach. My father sat at his desk in the fisheries laboratory, I think with his back to this beach so as not to be distracted, I suppose. On his balcony were the vertebrae of a great whale, like an unseen Henry Muir, quietly still. They haunt me now, still there. I should see if they are. I grew up where water meets land, sky meets water, in the most easterly town in Britain. These merging borderlands where salt and fresh water swirl together, a brackish place, where my father told me the winds came from Siberia as nothing was in the way to stop them. And other times when the car was dusty with sand, he told me it was sand from the dunes of the Sahara. I grew up knowing of impermanence, of constant ebb and flow, of flux, but also of the connectedness of the great world. After all, not only do the winds blow from the steppes, the brown, murky North Sea I loved, stretched into the turquoise of the Mediterranean that I could only imagine. I grew up aware that we couldn't conquer nature, though my father tamed and tended it so brilliantly in the garden to feed us all. I'm feeling sad again. It's flowing through a bit of pride I feel at writing this instead of doing my accounts, like salt and fresh water meeting down behind the house at Lake Lothing. Being a bit creative is giving me a buzz, like a walk to Fisher Row down to the marsh. I'm feeling freer. Here are some words from Robert Macfarlane on a similar subject, put better than I can. To be reminded that physical matter is simultaneously indestructible and entirely transmutable, that it can swap states drastically from vegetable to mineral or from liquid to solid. An attempt to hold these two contradictory ideas of permanence and mutability in the brain at the same time is usefully difficult, for it makes the individual feel at once valuable and superfluous. You become aware of yourself as constituted of nothing more than endlessly convertible matter, but also of always being perpetuated in some form. Such knowledge grants us a kind of comfortless immortality, an understanding that our bodies belong to a limitless cycle of dispersal and reconstitution. The closeness of these unstable edges of the land is part of the secret of Norfolk's, a reflection of a half-conscious desire to be as contingent as spendthrift ourselves, to stay loose, cast off, be washed up somewhere unexpected. Down amongst these shifting sands, the world seems full of possibility. To be cast off, perhaps that's at the root of my love of dancing, to fly, to escape, to take wing, to be transported. Through the embodiment of an image or a chance meeting with another in an improvisation, one can be washed up somewhere unexpected, stay loose and be contingent. In somatic practice, where one's body becomes air or earth, we know we are endlessly convertible matter. And if we are, then our minds are too. Side note, just to be clear, though we might be superfluous, that does not absolve us of our collective responsibility to treat and care for the world and its creatures with respect and humility and try to stop man-made climate change. In the studio, the world seems full of possibility, sometimes, on a good day. In our practice, there is wildness. What is wildness? Well, to ponder on that would take longer than I have here with you and at the table. The sun is shining in now, and my hands are lit by it. It's brighter than the computer screen, cause for another little excitement in me. Here are some brief thoughts. Wildness could be the wonderful patterns of the world, the atmosphere, the weather, the migratory paths, the seasons, but it also might be Himalayan balsam taking over our riverbanks, forest fire, weeds pushing through concrete. Richard Mabey, in his wonderful book, Nature Cure, writes, "I'm touched by these seasonal encounters, the first swallow, but I'm also touched by those moments where nature is breaking the rules, freeing itself from our tidy categories and timetables, being independent, unpredictable, sassy, making things anew. Both kinds of experience seem to be varieties of wildness and far removed from the predictability of a man-managed world. In the nature of things, life will always keep one step beyond the measurers and the managers. A ceaseless, gratuitous, inventive bodging is what keeps the world going. Let's ceaselessly keep inventing and bodging. That's natural, that's wild, and I sense that's what people are fearful of in life. It's up to us, I guess, to keep inventing, to remind people of the impermanence of our tidy categories and timetables, and to remind them that we are both valuable and superfluous in equal measure. A wild landscape is a self-willed landscape. I believe the root of the word wildness in Chinese translates to something like self-ablazement. Isn't that thrilling? So go on, ablaze yourselves. What a fantastic image. The low sun is now skimming the wet grass in the orchard beyond the bushes. I can see the bright, glistening, silvery green, and I can imagine the cold wetness if I touched it. The ice in the bird bath is silver too, just outside the window. It is ablazing itself beautifully for a moment before it turns to liquid again. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Laura. I would like to introduce Dee Haddon, who holds the James Arnott Chair in Theatre Studies at the University of Glasgow. Dee has written a number of books, including Autobiography and Performance, which CPP students should know pretty well. For some years now, Dee has been exploring and using walking as an aesthetic material in her practice and that of others. A current concern is the normativity of walking discourse and practice. She has published a number of essays on walking, has completed a walking project, 40 Walks, and has an ongoing walking work, the Walking Library. More details of Dee's work are on your programme. Welcome her to the stage.
I'm not on the stage because I was so wild that I just thought there'd be a clicker with a PowerPoint or a computer up there that I could just hit my slides, and there isn't. So using every crisis as an opportunity to invent, here we are inventing. I'm quite excited about this, actually. I think it's going to work quite well. FK Alexander, don't leave the room for a cigarette or a vape, because the last slide is really dedicated to you. Okay. So thank you very much to the organisers and to CPP staff for inviting me to be here this evening. It really is a privilege and a pleasure, and I do wish everyone the very best of luck with the work that you're making this week. So walk on, an imperative. For the love of walking. 1, 40 walks. On December the 3rd, 2009, I turned 40. I threw a peripatetic party, sending 40 invitations to people I wanted to spend more time with, inviting them to take me on a walk of their choice, any walk, anywhere. My birthday party lasted 4 years. And I walked up Arthur's Seat, the Camel's Hump, Goat Fell, and Benendochach, into Richmond Park by day and by night, an outside swimming pool at dusk, and a cemetery in the snow. I walked along the Crinan Canal, the Forth and Clyde Canal, the Clyde River, the River Thames, the Pembrokeshire Coastal Path, the Cumbria Coastal Path, Dunoon's Esplanade, the road to Rossneath, Fortrose Beach, the South Downs, Macher Bay, and Houseman's Boulevards. I walked around Alloa, Exeter, the Kelvingrove Museum, Godalming, Glasgow, Mugdock Country Park, the Vigeland Sculpture Park, Little Sparta, Ullswater, Conway, Bristol, Culzean Castle, the Swanscombe Peninsula, and Highgate Cemetery. I walked through the Tamar Valley, the South Tyne Valley, the Lee Valley, and the Paris Arcades. I walked back to my childhood village and across the Scottish border. 40 walks was a birthday present to myself. I walked with both old friends and new acquaintances, ranging in age from 3 to late 70s. I was taken on favourite walks, familiar walks, new walks, desired walks, memorial walks, nostalgic walks, short walks, and long walks. This was walking as gifting. 40 walks depended entirely on the generosity of my invitees, and it prompted me to think and write about walking and friendship. 2, the Walking Library. In the summer of 2012, the Walking Library was inaugurated. The Walking Library, a library that takes books for a walk, follows in long historical footsteps. In 1818, John Keats walked to the Lake District in Scotland, carrying with him Dante's Divine Comedy. In 1867, on a 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf, John Muir, yes, our John Muir, carried a copy of Robert Burns' poetry, Milton's Paradise Lost, William Wood's Botany, and a small New Testament. In 2012, Dee Hedden and Misha Myers walked across Belgium, carrying Charles Dickens' Night Walks, Rebecca Solnit's A Field Guide to Getting Lost, and Kathleen Jamie's Findings. What book would you take for a walk? The first walking library was made for Sideways, an itinerant art festival aiming to connect ecology and culture through using a network of underused footpaths. We received more than 200 suggestions to our question, what book would you take for a walk? And purchased about 90 recommended titles, creating a library carried by 4 volunteer librarians at a time. We walked the library across Belgium, reading and walking for a month. Since then, we've created other libraries that are filled with other books recommended to take on a walk, each one prompted by a different question and a different walk. What book would you carry to give you shelter? What book would carry you through the long, dark night? What book would you give to a woman walking? Walking with a library of books, we explore how these literary companions add to the journey, how reading in situ affects the experience of the journey and the experience of walking, how journeying affects the experience of reading. What book would you take for a walk? Three, walking interconnections. In 2014, Dr. Sue Porter invited me to join her research project, Walking Interconnections. This project brought together walking, disability, and sustainability. It responded to the fact that disabled people's voices have been largely absent from both the sustainability debate and walking discourses. If you remember Hurricane Katrina, it was the disabled and ill who were abandoned. Working with a diverse group of co-researchers, I created a verbatim audio walk. These are Liz's words. Okay, so we've come past the nature reserve and got onto a track that we were both getting really quite enthusiastic about. It's one of those very sustainable tracks, tramped down earth, and my trike has coped just about with a loose gravel surface on it. And beyond this gate, we've come to what looks lovely, real potential for open countryside, but we've come to one of those kissing gates, which is impassable. I would probably get stuck in and left there because I think I'd get wedged. And there's a lovely big gate next to it, but unfortunately that's padlocked. So that's the end of this route for us. So, well, now we're just going to backtrack. And these are the words of Hayley and Neil, planning a walk to take together. I was thinking about walking around my allotment site. And there's places to sit? Good question. Not readily, no, there aren't. This research collaboration prompted me to reflect on the things I'd written about walking, including these words. Walking together tends to result in a shared rhythm and pace, a settling into step that accommodates each participant. And I reflected on the words of others too, words I'd admired and often quoted, like these from anthropologists Tim Ingold and Jo Lever-Gunst. Walking is an accomplishment of the whole body in motion. Walking is not just what a body does, it's what a body is. Pay attention to experiences of tactile, feet-first engagement with the world. And these words from architectural theorist Jane Rendell. There's a kind of thinking that corresponds to walking, one that follows an itinerary, keeps up a certain pace and remains in constant motion, moving from one thing to another. And these other words of mine. Beat, beat, step, step. Beat, beat, step, step. As if heartbeat and footstep are always in time. Beat, beat, step, step. In thinking and writing about walking, my mind's eye sees an upright body walking on two legs. It pictures walking as good, healthy, fun, freeing, relaxing, resistant, tactical, liberatory, green. And yes, walking can be all of this. But walking into connections taught me other perspectives. Walking as demanding, unpredictable, exhausting, unreliable, stressful. Walking as tentative, stuttering, precarious. Some of this is to do with access, of course, or lack of it, which is something we must challenge collectively. But this collaborative research project provoked me in other ways too. Carried away by my love of walking, I worry that I might have colluded in a neoliberal, state-oriented imperative. Walk or else. Walk on. 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 Save money, keep fit, unwind, reduce emissions. You will walk on. It's been one of the best things I've ever done. I feel like I've found the real me again. I'm healthier, fitter, happier, more confident, and finally on the way to losing that last stubborn stone in weight. Biopolitics. Will you walk on? Walk on. Walk on. Walk on. Walk on.
Thank you very much, Dee. We now invite you to have another discussion, 10-minute discussion at your table. And we ask you to focus on the following question. How does the land/landscape shape the artist, the work, and the community? This time, I would like you to consolidate your discussion into a statement. And in 10 minutes' time, a member from your table will pick a stone and place in the cairn as you speak your statement into a microphone. And I will explain this after you've had your discussion, okay? You need to just quickly do it as I speak without interrupting me. So the way this is going to work is that if a member from each table picks a stone from the center of the table and comes up, speaks the statement in the microphone, places your stone into the cairn here in the middle. So you're going to say your statement, place the stone, and go back to your table. And if we can start with you guys and just make our way like a little journey or a path through the space, okay? And just to make this quite quick, oh, you're up already, brilliant, yeah, great. Okay, so if you come, and then when you say your statement and you place your rock, you guys get ready to come up. Does that make sense? Great, let's go for it.
Make free, shake free, break free.
By being a transient relationship, this rock is different to a 3-year-old than it is to a 42-year-old.
If you stay still, what would happen if you fall through that crack?
I want to run into the sea naked and roll down a hill on my belly.
By bringing our consciousness, the interconnectivity of our wildness, passion, and creativity.
Our landscape offers no syllabus, but welcomes a response.
Just keep your pin in the door.
The landscape and the nature influences so much that in Norway we don't have even a word for wilderness. We are there.
It is the earth beneath our feet, the words we speak, the people and spaces we meet, even if they're not with us now.
The shape, the view, composed by the voice of every action we make.
The landscape is the work, is the artist, is the community. When you destroy one, you destroy the others. When you build one, you build the others.
The people, a collaborator, a site, a frame, a liminal space, and perhaps an ephemeral moment.
So here we are, the artists in the woods. What is the landscape? Who is the landscape? The artists, the work, the babes, the community. We are what shape the landscape, whether it is beneficial or not.
I play call and response with the landscape. A conversation, a collaboration, a duet, one forever informing the other.
The landscape can inspire a person only if the person allows them to.
Thank you very much. Had to let go of Puddle, but it just has to happen. I'm going to speak into 2 microphones because I can. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming tonight. This short journey has taken an end, but don't worry, there's a bigger one ahead of us, which is the festival itself. See how I'm relating it back to the theme? Still with puddles. Yeah, full circle. There you go. Okay, so thank you for coming to the symposium and for sharing your thoughts. I hope you will agree that we have had a very stimulating evening, and the ideas that have emerged will walk with us through the rest of the festival. Thank you so much. Dramatic pause. Alistair, Sarah, John, Rosemary, and Dee. We would now like to invite all of you to join us in the hub, which is on the other side of this curtain where the bar is, which is a delight to behold, where we can continue. Actually just learned that today. I've never heard that before. A delight to behold, okay. Where we can continue, it means that it's a really nice space. If someone is going, what does that mean? Because I did that. And then I was told, yeah. Right, okay. Which is a delight to behold, where we can continue this conversation until I will make an announcement for Maria Brander's performance, Telling the Bees, which begins in this space in about half an hour, hopefully close to 9 o'clock. Thank you all. So can we please, as quickly as we can, move into the hub space and just continue the conversation. Give everyone a round of applause. Woo!